We are breaking down our top 20 Dynasty running backs in tier-based fashion, breaking down the whole landscape of the running back position, who's over who, why this guy's over that guy, and also on the side of this video, when we get into it, we're going to have the trade value chart that we are going to be launching on flockfantasy.com. The quarterbacks is already live, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends will be coming in the next coming days. So this should be fun. This should give you an overall landscape of our Dynasty rankings, how we rank these guys, the tiers that go into it, and also trade value chart accompanying that position in Superflex format. So before we get into it, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, you guys are seeing me correctly. A beardless Lotster making his way onto today's video, talking about, you guessed it, Lotster's favorite position, the running back position. But all jokes aside, we talk about how little value the running back position holds, both in real life and in fantasy. But there's still some valued assets over there in Dynasty. We're going to talk about them today, like Corey said, and let's get right into it.
All right, so now, as you guys can see on the screen, these are our top 20 Dynasty running backs, or these are my top 20 Dynasty running backs. We're going to go back and forth of the differences that we have throughout this video. But as I was talking about before the intro, you see the trade value chart on the left side to break up these guys into tiers. I think of all positions, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, this is the one that is the most difficult to rank because of the shelf life of the position. You have to balance, your productive guys like Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley types versus your younger Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson guys that we're projecting forward. But if they hit, obviously will have a ton of value accumulation on the open market, of course, along with the production that they bring at a young age. So we can start right at the top with the RB1, consensus RB1 in fantasy and Dynasty. In Bijan Robinson, we have him as the only running back in the 3 first-rounders tier. So obviously, if you guys have not had your rookie draft yet and you have the 101, that's about the value you should be looking to get for Bijan Robinson. And I would say definitely aim for a first-rounder in this year's class inside the top 4 or 5 picks so you can get some quarterback equity, because I would assume you're probably selling Bijan Robinson because you're not ready to compete. But as far as Bijan's value relative to the rest of the running back landscape, what are your thoughts? Do you think this is an appropriate difference between Bijan and the other guys, or do you think they should maybe be closer?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, realistically, on most trade markets, if you were to try to trade up or tier up, quote unquote, to Bijan Robinson, I do think any of the running backs that we have right after him, Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, and then the guy I actually have in that tier, Jahmyr Gibbs. We'll get into that difference in a second. I feel like if you were to say, hey, listen, I'm going to go buy Bijan Robinson, the least that they're going to be asking for on top of those running backs would be a first-round pick. So I do think that is appropriate. Bijan Robinson, we know that this guy's already the running back too in terms of redraft, going, I believe, as an ADP of 7 overall in Underdog Fantasy. So if he's already got that redraft appeal, he's a 21-year-old running back. He lands in a situation in Atlanta who might be the best or possibly even second-best team in that division right now, given the outlook of that state. I would not be shocked if Bijan Robinson was the overall running back 1 in fantasy as a rookie. And if that were to happen, I mean, this guy would be sitting on his own mountain in terms of value compared to the rest of the position.
Yeah, exactly. I think everybody knows Bijan is quite valuable as a running back. The next tier, like you mentioned, has some debate in it. For me, I see it as Jonathan Taylor and Breece Hall. And again, this is going to be a discussion this entire video. Do you value the production or do you value the youth? Because Jonathan Taylor is 2 years older than Breece Hall, but I have no doubt in my mind that he's going to be a bounce back candidate this year. Top 5 running back yet again. Hopefully, one of the best running backs in redraft leagues. He's still young enough that he probably has 2 to 3 more years of a high shelf life. He's one of the few running backs in the NFL that I would imagine potentially gets an extension by his team as well. Because typically, teams are hesitant to pay running backs, but JT might be an exception. And then Breece Hall, of course, had he not gotten injured, would be ahead of Jonathan Taylor for me in my rankings. But because we have potentially about a half season coming up where he might be stunted production-wise, he fits a little bit behind Jonathan Taylor for me, because even though he's younger, he might not be back to his full strength come 2024 or whatever. And that's kind of the debate. I think the first debate is who's RB2.
Yeah, no, and I would agree. And I'll get into a guy I have in this tier as well, like I mentioned in a second. But in terms of just JT versus Breece Hall, yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. I do think if Breece Hall was fully entering this year healthy, you can argue that RB1 and 2 would be like a 1A, 1B situation with him and Bijan. I think he would at least be in his own tier as the running back too, given the age dynamic, given what he showed last year in the time he was healthy. There was a stint where he looked like a legitimate top 5 running back as a rookie, despite, entering in a murky situation prior to that ACL tear. So I do think the ACL tear does knock him down, quote unquote, to this half tier being within this group of guys for me. Jonathan Taylor, kind of the inverse. He was the running back one in Dynasty last year, was a late first round pick in startup drafts, but ultimately he dealt with injuries. The offense wasn't very good. Now entering a year older, and we're kind of uncertain about the situation of the offense heading into this year. So that's why he's not on the tier with Bijan. And ultimately, because of those concerns of these two guys, if we switch quickly over to my rankings, I do have Bijan, or not Bijan Robinson, I do have Jahmyr Gibbs in this tier with Breece Hall, with Jonathan Taylor. He doesn't have the concerns from a value standpoint, in my opinion, that JT and Breece Hall do, obviously with the injury, like I mentioned, and the H-class offensive concerns with Jonathan Taylor, which kind of closes the gap, like I said, for Jahmyr Gibbs. Obviously, he's got concerns. Is he going to be a pure bell cow? We don't necessarily know, but the 12th overall draft capital is there. This offense is going to be extremely strong, and given his receiving profile, I think he's going to be a threat for 100-plus targets every single year. This is a type of player where if he shows that despite his 199-pound frame, that he can handle north of 200 carries in the season, this would be the legitimate 1B in Dynasty in terms of running backs.
I agree with that take, although I will say from like a year-over-year redraft standpoint, while I think Gibbs can finish as a top 5 running back in a redraft season, I do not think he could ever finish as RB1 overall, whereas Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, and Bijan Robinson absolutely could, which is why I think Jahmyr Gibbs belongs down a little bit into the next year with those more productive veteran types, along with Travis Etienne, where I have him listed here. And we can kind of go down into that tier because, like I said, a mid-first rounder plus is probably even potentially, depending on your league market, a little bit of a low projection, I would say. This is just kind of a result of us not valuing the running back position very highly in general. But I think in some league markets, it would cost you 2 first rounders for Christian McCaffrey. It would cost you 2 first rounders for Jahmyr Gibbs, for Saquon Barkley, for Travis Etienne. For me, about a mid first rounder plus is how I value these guys. Let's say, 106 and, a second rounder next year or something like that.
Yeah, the only real rebuttal I would say, and why I have Gibbs the tier ahead versus the mid first rounder plus guys like you kind of laid out, which by the way, I have the same guys for reference in terms of other than Gibbs with McCaffrey, Barkley, and Etienne. The difference that I do have is if somebody were to tell me that they had Jahmyr Gibbs ranked ahead of Jonathan Taylor and Breece Hall, I don't think that's outlandish. Whereas if they had said, Christian McCaffrey is my running back 2 in Dynasty, Saquon Barkley is my running back 2 in Dynasty, or Travis Etienne is my running back 2 in Dynasty, I wouldn't believe it quite as much. So I do think for me personally, even if it's a slightly mini tier, I do personally value Gibbs over the win now guys.
Yeah, I think you could also argue that Gibbs would fetch more on the open market in
Yeah.
a trade, given that he fits both a rebuilding team and a contending team. As much as we don't really love to buy running backs if we're rebuilding, I think you could get away with it a little bit more with a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs as opposed to, Travis Etienne, who's still young, but is more so in his production window. So the next, 3 guys that we have there, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Travis Etienne, I debated moving Etienne down into the next tier just because I think McCaffrey is, bar none, best running back in redraft this year. He, while, almost 27 years old, is going to be a massive advantage for contending teams. And same goes for Saquon Barkley, although not quite to the level of Christian McCaffrey and a year younger. I think you're going to get maybe 2 to 3 years of great top 5 level production out of Saquon Barkley. And if he had gotten extended by the Giants, I think I would argue that you could probably even take him over Christian McCaffrey, just knowing that, he'd have 1 to 2 years, 2 to 3 years of lockdown volume headed his way.
Yeah, so in terms of the breakdown over on flockfantasy.com, like we kind of mentioned, Bijan Robinson is my 13th overall player. The gap there does show between them with JT, Breece Hall, and Jahmyr Gibbs occupying the 25, 26, and 28 spots for me personally, hence why I have that in that tier. But in terms of this tier, I have McCaffrey at 34, Barkley at 40, Etienne at 41. I do think that you can make the claim that any of these guys should go in any order. You kind of mentioned with Saquon, obviously he is on that franchise tag as of now. If he does re-sign, maybe you can reconsider. For me personally, why I consider McCaffrey kind of the head of this tier is although he is older and more volatile, I would say, given the market, given what type of narratives we have seen being formed around Christian McCaffrey, he's still the clear-cut running back 1 in terms of redraft, a clear-cut top 4, top 5 overall pick and more drafts. Honestly, I've seen him go, 102, 103 in some drafts. That is how high the redraft market is on him. Whereas with Saquon Barkley, he's more so an early to mid second round pick. And although you can argue, well, Saquon's a year younger, I view both of them kind of as win now type of running backs. Like if you have them on your roster and you're not a top 3, top 4 overall team, they probably shouldn't be on your roster anyways. So therefore, I would just prefer the production of a McCaffrey this year, given where he's kind of standing in redraft versus where I have Barkley, although they are in the same tier.
Yeah, I think for me, it just comes down to the study that I did last year where Saquon's not at the running back touch and age apex yet. He's about 2 years and like 300 touches away from it. And Christian McCaffrey has already surpassed both thresholds for carries, targets, and age. So he's a little bit more of a risky asset as a result of that, which for me, I think you could order these guys in any which order. Travis Etienne, like I said, I think you could argue should belong in the next tier down just because the signaling of the Tank Bigsby pick in the 3rd round makes me think that Travis Etienne is probably capped as like a 60% opportunity share running back. Yeah. Granted, this offense is going to be very good, and he might catch more passes this year than we saw last year. But at the same time, I don't think it's outrageous to suggest that he was a disappointment relative to, like, if I told you before the season last year, James Robinson was not going to, or was going to get traded midseason to the Jets, you probably would have drafted Travis Etienne at the tail end of the 1st round. Most likely. Yeah. He would have been a highly thought of guy, and he finished as like a mid RB2 last year. So I think him disappointing to some degree can't be overstated. Like, I don't think we should just ignore that. But I also do think, it was really his first full year in the NFL. He was basically a rookie last year, and this offense is going to be explosive with Ridley, with Lawrence, with Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, and all those dudes. And Etienne can both catch passes and score touchdowns.
Yeah, well, like the thing that I keep referring back to when it comes to Travis Etienne is, like you kind of mentioned, like this is going to be a high-powered offense. Although he was splitting time, like you said at the beginning of the year, James Robinson obviously taking some of that workload, him eventually moving on. I believe he got traded to the Jets last year, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so once he got traded, like we did see that workload. He had 265 opportunities last year in the 17 games he played, despite splitting time with Robinson at the beginning of the year. And he only scored 5 touchdowns, despite being the running back 17 overall in the games he played. So, I mean, theoretically, if we're evaluating this offense, we expect Trevor Lawrence to take the step up. Calvin Ridley's going to add to this passing game. We expect it to be maybe one of the top 7 or 8 scoring offenses in the league, which I think, given the Vegas expectations for them in terms of their win totals, is very well within the realm of possibility. 5 touchdowns for Travis Etienne just won't happen again, in my opinion. Like, I think if this offense is going to be as strong as we expect it to, he's more so flirting in that 8 to 12 type of range. And if that's the case, you're mentioning a running back that could potentially flirt with 50 plus targets next year, 225 plus carries on a really, really good team. I think that's just going to be a bet I'm going to make every single time. So as a result, again, I do view him pretty after these guys. I mentioned McCaffrey and Barkley being, slightly above him in terms of the tier. I do think he's slightly above the rest of the guys in the tier after him, though, because of the offensive outlook of the Jacksonville Jaguars this year.
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing that makes me nervous is Doug Peterson and the Tank Bigsby selection. Maybe that he's not going to be the primary goal line back of that team, because Tank is the, thumper contact balance type of dude. His name is literally Tank. But Etienne himself is also very good on the goal line. So it really comes down to, like, are you going to listen to what they've done so far, which is draft a 3rd round running back? Doug Peterson's historically used the committee. I think Etienne's ceiling might be a little overrated, in my opinion. I think some people might think, oh, he can be the RB1 overall. I personally don't think he would get the workload to qualify for that. I think he can be, though, what we all wanted DeAndre Swift to be, which was 60 to 70% opportunity share, get 70 plus targets on a season, and score touchdowns and be efficient.
Oddly enough, it's funny because we went into it thinking, or last year thinking, at least for my sake, that his upside path would be, DeAndre Swift-esque, where maybe he's like 150 carries and he's flirting with 70, 80 plus targets. But in actuality, he was more so used like what Kenneth Walker was last year. It was really remarkable. However, I do think that the receiving upside maybe isn't as, or maybe is more understated than what actually exists, because although he only had 45 targets, he was extremely efficient on those targets. We're talking about 35 receptions, nearly 320 receiving yards, over 7 yards per target. For reference, we mentioned DeAndre Swift in the mid 5s in terms of yards per target. Like, he's been a very efficient receiver this past year. If they can get that back out of him, given the offensive philosophy, having more of that banger back there to occupy the quote-unquote James Robinson role, if you're telling me, Travis Etienne goes from 18 to 20 carries per game, which he was averaging down the stretch, to a 14, 15 carry, 5-6 targets, highly efficient offense, I would take that role any day over the role he even showed last year.
Yeah, no, I'm on board there. So the next tier down, you guys can see it's a pretty mega tier here. And again, it's so difficult to argue any of these running backs being at the end. Like if you wanted to tell me that you would take Austin Eckler over all these guys, I don't even think it's an outrageous take if you're in a competitive window trying to win a championship, because I would argue that probably Eckler has the best redraft outlook of all of these players. But at the same time, we're trying to balance age and shelf life and some of these other factors, contracts and stuff like that. So for me, I think when I balance all those factors, Josh Jacobs is the guy that stands out to me as the best combination of all of them, because not only do I think he's extremely undervalued on Underdog Fantasy right now at the early third round range that he's going, because he was top 3 running back in redraft last year. He's been a top 15 running back every year of his career, and his offense got better. They brought in more scheme fit type of receivers and a quarterback who's run the offense a little better. And Jacobs is well set up to do exactly what he did last year. Borderline again, as long as he's as efficient. I like the fact that he's still, 25 years old, playing on the franchise tag. He's probably going to be highly productive this year, maybe get extended by the Raiders, maybe go on in free agency and sign a contract. We have no real idea, but I like that he's young enough that he's a good balance of both win now and potentially some still, having some long-term value, not going to fall off a cliff after this year.
Yep. No, I agree. Josh Jacobs, pretty set, kind of like a clear, contending running back at this point, which, kind of is like if he was the same age as Brees, Jonathan Taylor, some of these guys, I think you can argue him being inside that McCaffrey, Barkley, ETN tier. But because he's obviously a couple years older than them, because he doesn't exactly have that redraft appeal that McCaffrey and Barkley do, I do think this is a fair spot for him, being the head of the mid to late first round tier. Next guy, Kenneth Walker. Listen, if they did not draft Zach Charbonnet at 51st overall in this draft, this would be a guy that's clearly on the cusp of, I would say, probably right between where Gibbs and McCaffrey currently are for me. I think that's about where Kenneth Walker would be had they not drafted Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah, the situation in Seattle, I'm kind of just like going to lean into the uncertainty. I think is going to be my philosophy from both a redraft and a dynasty perspective, because nobody really knows what to expect at this point in time. And yeah, you have to respect the second round investment that they put into Zach Charbonnet, but Kenneth Walker was great last year, and I think he's still going to be great. And we could just be talking about the next great duo of backfield, and they're both young and they're going to be, dominating the NFL for the next couple of years. I actually think the Zach Charbonnet selection, it's a little underratedly talked about how, it might hurt the receiving core, because it looks like a shift towards maybe more of a run first offense versus what they showed last year with Geno Smith. So I think the offense is going to be good. I think Walker's going to have his opportunities in the red zone, but unfortunately we don't know how much Zach Charbonnet is going to factor in, and it hurts Walker definitely, knocking him down a tier here. Javonte Williams, also another guy that I think is a very difficult evaluation, because he's basically on the exact same trajectory J.K. Dobbins was on last year. Same exact injury, compound ACL tear. We're hearing good reports, but honestly, I don't care. Like I bought into J.K. Dobbins last year because I was like, oh, the factors were all good. He's young. He
talent will outweigh
to recover. Like, I don't care until Javonte Williams is on the field playing games. I really don't. And the other thing too is when you get injured at running back and you are coming off of an ACL tear and you don't look the same, which Javonte Williams could definitely do, like J.K. Dobbins did last year, then you might lose that starting running back job. And P. Ryan's a capable guy. There's still guys available in free agency that they could add as well. It's no guarantee that Javonte Williams is like, oh, the second he comes back, he's just going to be the workhorse running back.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely on that. And actually, if we switch to my rankings, you'll see I'm even more pessimistic when it comes to Javonte. I actually have him in a tier below. That was the big difference, I would say, quote unquote, with our mid to late first versus our late first tier, is that I personally have only these 5 guys in the mid to late first tier, depending on whether you want to balance the age versus the win now value. I feel like all of these guys have the best comparable combo of those, if that makes sense. Javonte Williams, I don't know what to do with him, because he doesn't have the value security, the value like locked in that a younger running back, like even, honest to God, even if Pierce or even Najee do at this current point. But at the same time, he's coming off an injury. So do we really want to invest in him as this win now type of running back? I don't even know where I'm going to be ranking him in terms of redraft. So with that case, because I don't even know if he's going to be a top 10, top 15, top 20 redraft running back for me at this current point, I just have to value him in with the Chubbs, the Ecklers, the Dobbins, the Najee Harris, the DeAndre Swifts. The theme of this tier is that either we don't know how long they're going to last, as Eckler, Chubb, those guys, or we don't know what the ceiling is, as DeAndre Swift, Najee Harris, Javonte Williams, J.K. Dobbins, and even some of the rookie running backs for this year. So it is truly fascinating to see how widespread the rankings of Javonte Williams is across the entire dynasty landscape. Again, we kind of, took the bait last year. We had Dobbins pretty high. We had Javonte Williams extremely high going into the year. But once the ACL happened and once we saw what exactly happened from the coaching standpoint, from the player standpoint of J.K. Dobbins with the complicated ACL, I feel like this has to apply for Javonte Williams. Again, people might be asking, well, why doesn't this apply for Breece Hall? Apparently, Breece Hall's tear was completely clean. Every single doctor we've been hearing from has said, I trust Breece Hall to be able to come back at full capacity. We haven't really been hearing that same glowing praise across fantasy Twitter from the doctor standpoint in terms of Javonte Williams.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that the Jets are also still making contingency plans. They drafted a running back in the 5th round, and there's no guarantee that Breece Hall gets back to, at least for this season. I think long-term he'll be fine, but for this season, maybe it's more of a running back by committee than we're expecting. So I also am more pessimistic on Breece Hall in startup drafts as well, because there's a possibility that he loses some value. Maybe mid-season this year, people are valuing him as like the RB5 or RB6 in Dynasty, as opposed to, he was the RB1 in Dynasty before Bijan Robinson was drafted. So the rest of this tier, we kind of brushed over these guys briefly, but I talked about Dameon Pierce and Ramondre Stevenson on a couple occasions on Twitter, and I broke down Dameon Pierce in a video as well. Why he was rising up my rankings basically was that he's a 23-year-old running back. They didn't draft anyone this year. It looks like Houston is taking this approach that, we hit on a 4th-round running back last year. We're just going to ride this dude into the ground. And he's also kind of like the mini Jacobs. He's going to get a lot of early down work. The offense it's not great, but it's improved at least. They have CJ Stroud starting now. It's not Davis Mills anymore. They have some receiving talent added with Dalton Schultz and some of these other dudes that came in. So I think Dameon Pierce is probably like your prototypical RB2 for a contender. Because I think he's a good option to have, because he's not going to lose value after this year, assuming they don't draft somebody. But at the same time, he is still quite risky. So the running back landscape falls off pretty quickly if you don't have, like, ideally in a contending window, I want to have 2 of the top 3 tier guys.
Yeah, no, I agree there completely. Or, like if you want to have 2 of these top guys, then maybe take at most 1 of the other guys. Or hypothetically, if you want to say, hey, listen, I want Christian McCaffrey, Jahmyr Gibbs, and I'm going to punt the position until I have an Aaron Jones who's cheaper than this. I think Aaron Jones, he's going to be obviously a tier below these guys, but he represents that same win now type of appeal, only his cost is a fraction of what even, Chubb, Eckler, some of those other win now running backs kind of represent. So I like that you brought up that philosophy that I'll have at most 2 of these high price guys. And then I'm looking for value. I'm looking for like I said, Aaron Joneses, the James Connors. Maybe you go down and you go to even David Montgomery at that point. You want an even cheaper running back. I think there's so many, high priority handcuff / contingent standalone backup running backs that you can have that can fill out the depth for you in running back. Hence why I'm less likely to invest a high capital pick into the position.
Yeah, I mean, we preach about going fragile at running back in redraft, but it does absolutely apply in Dynasty. And I'm literally, we're in the middle of a startup right now, a Devy startup. I drafted 2 of these guys, Saquon Barkley and Kenneth Walker, who are like in this like area that can anchor my team. And the rest of my running back core is Roschon Johnson, Brian Robinson, Rashad Penny, Leonard Fournette, guys that are going to maybe give me some, RB2 production in good spots and that kind of thing. But most of my team is built on my strong quarterback core, my strong tight end core, my strong wide receiver core. That's just generally the philosophy like we like to build teams in general. And it absolutely applies when you're trying to contend. And Ramondre Stevenson's no real difference from Dameon Pierce, because he's the same type of running back. He's going to be probably really good this year. He's young enough that he's still going to have value going forward, but they could still replace him in next year's draft. Maybe they move on from him. Maybe they mix up the workload a little bit more this year. Ramondre Stevenson and Dameon Pierce are pretty much on a level playing field. I actually have Najee a tier higher than you, it looks like, or I guess you have Pollard in this tier as well. But the reason I like Najee, and I talked about how I think Kenny Pickett was a big winner of the draft. Well, it also applies to Najee Harris as well, because I thought there was a legitimate chance they might have drafted a running back in like the 2nd or 3rd round, and they did not. And not only that, but they drafted a great run blocking tight end, a left tackle in the 1st round, Kenny Pickett going into his 2nd year. Najee Harris can't be overstated too, that he was not healthy last year. He came into the season with a foot injury. And even though we've historically been lower on Najee Harris, and if you guys took our advice last offseason to sell him when he was like the dynasty RB2 in the landscape and he was like a borderline first round pick, it probably worked out for you. It doesn't mean I'm going to bury Najee Harris forever. I actually think he's almost at a price point where I'm almost willing to buy back into him.
Yeah, oddly enough, I think, I mean, if we look at this, I believe we pretty much have Najee Harris almost exactly lockstep in our ranking. It's just I have more guys in the late first tier. Because although I have, here, let me scroll up a little bit. Although I have Tony Pollard ahead of him here, like he's still ahead of Javonte for me, ahead of Eckler, Dobbins. Like, where would his placement be in comparison to yours? Like, what overall rank do you have Najee?
I have Najee at 14, and I think it's a complete oversight on your part to have DeAndre Swift ahead of him just because we don't know DeAndre Swift's role.
Yeah. By the way, he's my RB14 on the dot, and that's fair. I just think the upside case for DeAndre Swift, if I'm going to invest in a running back this range, I would just rather do that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think if we go back and look at mine too, like I have a guy that he's Swift is your Dobbins. Like Dobbins is the guy that I believe still in the upside case that I'm willing to take the shot on with a late first round pick if I'm a contender. I'm in a situation right now in one league where I have Bijan Robinson as my anchor running back. My wide receiver core is loaded, like 7 deep of great guys. I have Herbert, Kirk Cousins, and Anthony Richardson as my quarterbacks, and I think Kittle's my tight end. My only flaw on my team, because I have Madison, AJ Dillon, a couple other guys behind Bijan, is that if I can get J.K. Dobbins for my late first rounder next year, because I'm one of the best teams in my league, then I'm going to try and go out and do it. But the guy's being kind of a wad about it, not trading me J.K. Dobbins. But for me, he's kind of like a perfect, like if I built out a hero RB, getting Dobbins as my RB2 is like my favorite guy to do that in dynasty format. So he's a guy that I believe in to take a step forward. If the Ravens pass more, he's got more pass catching upside. 2 years removed from the ACL tear, has the primary ball carrier goal line role in that offense. Even though Gus Edwards is going to be involved, I still believe in Dobbins to be potentially a guy that has low end RB1 upside, similar to what we saw from Mark Ingram back in 2019 when Lamar Jackson was firing us on all cylinders in Baltimore there.
Yep. No, I agree. A couple honorable mentions. I mean, actually, we haven't even got into some of the rookies. Obviously, this list is tailed by 2 rookies. Day 3 or round 3 running back with Devon Achane going to Miami, 84th overall pick there. Zach Charbonnet going to the Seattle Seahawks. We already mentioned his teammate with Kenneth Walker. I personally have Achane 1 spot ahead of Charbonnet. Again, we've already talked about it in terms of our rookie rankings videos as to why that's the case. Thought Charbonnet was the better prospect coming in, but the situation between him and Kenneth Walker, obviously we don't want to say overvalued landing spot in Dynasty. And I love that theory, like applicable 95 plus, 99+% of the time. But I do think it matters more in terms of the running back position. It's pretty simple to me. If you don't project into a top workload, I can't value as a top running back. And for the case of Zach Charbonnet, it's like, I want to value him as a top 12 guy. I want to value him. I want to value him where I have Josh Jacobs, where I have Kenneth Walker, where I have Javonte Williams, or where you have Javonte Williams. But like in that area, you guys can see on the screen right now. But when he's working with another guy in Kenneth Walker, who showed the success he had last year, at best, you're looking for hopefully a Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb situation. And at that point, you would need them to be arguably the most efficient running back duo we have seen in the last 10 years.
Yeah, no, exactly. You're hoping for an Ingram, Kamara, like you said, Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb type of situation. And if Charbonnet, like you said, had gone to the Bengals in the second round or the Chargers in the second round, he'd probably be my RB8 in Dynasty right now.
Yep.
But unfortunately, he did not go to those landing spots. And I think there'd be a real argument to take him over Travis Etienne potentially.
I agree.
At that point in time, but that's not the way the cookie crumbled. So anybody else we didn't talk about in this video, we didn't really mention Pollard, Eckler, Nick Chubb. Those guys are all just like 1 year projections. They're going to be, borderline RB1s. In Eckler's case, he might be a high end RB1. Pollard probably borderline RB1. Nick Chubb, high end RB2 type. We always talk about this in the running back landscape in general, is that when you get guys that are 26 years old, 27 years old, like a lot of those dudes are, I don't feel comfortable projecting more than 1 year at a time because they can fall off so quickly. Last year, there was probably people out there that thought Dalvin Cook was going to last 2 or 3 more years as the workhorse in Minnesota, or Joe Mixon would be 2 or 3 more years as the workhorse in Cincinnati. 1 year windows with those guys. If you have them on your team, you better be competing this year. They should not be on your roster.
I will add, though, the reason why I do have Pollard kind of in his own tier here ahead of a couple of those guys, it's quite simply, A, he's younger than a guy like Eckler, and B, I do think his win now projectable is just as high as those guys. Assuming he's fully recovered from that fractured fibula, the current competition for touches in terms of the Dallas backfield are Deuce Vaughn, Ronald Jones, and Malik Davis. Tony Pollard already showed he can be the RB8 in fantasy last year on a limited touch per game type of workload. Do I expect him to jump up into, 25 touch, or not 25, but like 24, 23, 22 opportunities per game? No, but if he can maintain 17 to 20 opportunities per game on this offense, an offense we expect to be one of the top 5 or so offenses in the entire NFL, after he already showed last year on a lessened workload that he can A, be one of the most efficient running backs in the league, and B, handle a nice receiving workload on top of that. I just think his ceiling might be top 5 overall running back. And aside from McCaffrey, Barkley, maybe even Jacobs, I don't think you're getting that type of ceiling from any of the guys not named Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, or Jameer Gibbs in the long term.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. It is worth noting he's a little older than he should be for a guy that's like playing on the franchise tag this year. He should be like 24, 25 years old. He's like 26 years old. 26. So it's definitely, and again, he's also on a franchise tag. So his situation long term, we have no idea if they're going to extend him, they're going to let him walk or whatever. So even still, I'm still projecting him as a 1-year guy. And from a redraft perspective, I would rather have Austin Eckler. So I would rather have Eckler in that area. But again, you got an extra year of, and just because Pollard is no longer on the Cowboys, if that's the case, he's still probably going to be a valuable piece of whatever team he goes to. So it's a balancing act. This running back is the hardest position to rank in Dynasty because you can't get everything right. You either have to value production or you have to value youth and production or just youth. There's a complex formula to the running back position. With wide receivers, it's like talent wins out in the long term. Quarterbacks, talent wins out, rushing upside wins out. And it's pretty simple. With running backs, it is much more difficult because it is much more redraft focused. Who would you take in redraft matters way more in dynasty running back rankings than it does in wide receiver quarterback rankings. And also where your team is at also matters a lot more as well.
100%. And I will say also a big negative on Pollard is the last time we saw him, he fucking broke his leg. How is he going to recover from that? And I think the reason why I have him higher comparatively is that Dallas hasn't really done enough to address the running back position and invested an 11 million tag in him. So I do think they probably feel pretty comfortable in terms of his rehab status. The fact they didn't draft, not Zach Charbonnet because he wasn't available, but any running back in terms of the round 2 area, even Devon A-Chain in the 3rd round area. Like they didn't have this highly invested type of back that you would be worried about with Pollard. So that's why I have him there. Other than that, I mean, there's not really much else to say. Like you said, it is a complete pendulum situation. What you weigh more is where the pendulum's going to be swinging. At the end of the day, in terms of running back, like you said, do you value the youth or do you value the redraft type of appeal? Do you value potentially somebody who can give it all to you in year 1, but can be worth, a rookie 3rd this time next year? Or do you value someone that potentially has some long-term type of sustainability? It all really depends what you value in terms of how you form your dynasty. But like we've been preaching throughout the year, quite simply is our foundation is based off our quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends. So we more so view running backs in the win now type of light, hence why we have it kind of ranked accordingly.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm very much okay with sending late 1st round picks for win now running backs like Josh Jacobs if you're in a contending window. Whereas if you sent a late 1st round pick for Josh Jacobs not in a contending window, then I would say that was a horrible trade. So the difference is understanding where your team's at, what the landscape of your league is, and do you actually have a chance to win? Otherwise, I don't want a single running back on my team. Like we usually don't have running backs on our team until we're ready to complete to actually make a competitive push to our championship. And only then do we start going shopping for running backs or spend our rookie picks on running backs.
And hear me out. I mean, if I'm 1 year punting out of a startup, the only running backs I'm going to even have on my team, if we're looking at it, are realistically going to be at the most expensive, the late 1st round guys. Maybe DeAndre Swift falls in a startup. Like I got him in the 8th round of a startup we just did. Maybe I'll take a plunge there. But realistically, we're looking more so in the, Kendre Millers, the fucking Antonio Gibsons, Roshan Johnsons, David Montgomery, AJ Dillon, Khalil Herbert, Brian Robinson, Alex Madison, Elijah Mitchell. Like these are the guys we're looking at. We're looking at those double-digit round guys where if something happened in the season, could you potentially make a little profit off of? Like, for example, last year, if Dalvin Cook got hurt and Alexander Madison had a 5-week sustained stretch where he was the clear-cut running back 1, his value would have went from a 13th, 14th round startup pick to potentially an 8th round within the season. So spotting those type of opportunity costs is how we appropriate the running back position.
Yeah, I have a 1-year punt team right now. My running back core is Zach Charbonnet, AJ Dillon, Alexander Madison, and Elijah Mitchell. Those are the only running backs on my roster. The rest of my team is Garrett Wilson, Olave, like receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends. I really don't care about about my running back core until I'm ready to make a competitive push. I have 4 ones next year. That'll probably be when I actually make my competitive push. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Again, hopefully you got some value from the trade values that we have listed on the side there. If you want to know, hey, like I only see the top 20 running backs. What about RB41 in your rankings? How much is he worth in a trade? The Dynasty trade value chart will be available on flockfantasy.com. You can use the promo code FSE for 30% off, a 2-day free trial, 6 months for free when you sign up annually. Quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends will have trade value charts up within the next week or so. Quarterbacks is already up there. Running backs should be up by the time you guys are watching this, and wide receivers and tight ends later this week as well. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if this is the first time you're checking us out. Leave any comments. Who are we too high on? Who are we too low on? Who did we get just right? You know, kind of the Goldilocks of comments down there below. And with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.